Most people believe poverty is a result of bad choices or a lack of effort. They see it as a personal failing, a moral weakness, a failure to pull yourself up by your bootstraps in a land of opportunity. That's the story we are told from birth, the foundational myth of our modern economy. But it's not the truth. It's not even close. The reality is that poverty is not an accident. It is a predictable, engineered outcome of a system designed to create it. Behind the curtain of meritocracy lies an architecture of disadvantage, a set of rules and mechanisms that systematically funnel wealth upward while trapping millions in a cycle of debt and scarcity. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is how the machinery of our economy actually works. This is the lore of money. We explore how money shapes history, power, and society. Subscribe for more. Before we expose how this system works today, you need to understand the official story they tell you. They tell you that we live in a meritocracy, where hard work and talent are rewarded, and that success is available to anyone who is willing to earn it. It sounds reasonable, doesn't it? It sounds fair. But here's what they don't tell you. They don't tell you that the game is rigged, that the rules were written by the winners long before you were born. The system doesn't just reward success, it manufactures failure and then blames the victims for their own misfortune. This trick is ancient, and its modern form was built on a foundation of deliberate exclusion. To understand the machine, we must first look at its blueprints. The architecture of modern inequality wasn't built overnight. It was constructed over centuries, piece by piece, on a foundation of brutal extraction and deliberate exclusion. The starting point was the institution of slavery, a system that generated staggering wealth for the nation by stealing the labor, freedom, and lives of millions of Black Americans. By the time of emancipation, Black people owned just 0.5% of the nation's wealth, having been denied any chance to accumulate capital for 250 years. The promise of 40 acres and a mule was a lie, a betrayal that forced newly freed people into exploitative sharecropping arrangements that were little more than slavery by another name. While this was happening, the federal government was actively subsidizing wealth creation for white citizens, offering them land grants and low-interest loans to settle the West. From the very beginning, the game had two different sets of rules. This continued into the 20th century, when the government stepped in to create the American middle class, but only for some Americans. During the Great Depression, the New Deal created programs like Social Security, but they were deliberately designed to exclude domestic and agricultural workers, the two sectors where the majority of Black Americans labored. The most powerful mechanism of all was a practice called redlining. In the 1930s, federal agencies created color-coded maps of every city, grading neighborhoods on their mortgage risk. Any neighborhood with even a few Black residents was outlined in red and labeled hazardous, cutting them off from federally insured loans. This policy blocked Black families from participating in home ownership, which was the single greatest engine of middle-class wealth creation in American history. It was a government-sponsored program to build white suburbs while trapping Black families in disinvested urban cores. This system was perfected after World War II with the GI Bill, one of the most celebrated laws in American history. It offered returning veterans low-cost mortgages and free college tuition, propelling a generation of white families into the middle class. But the law was administered at the local level, where Black veterans were systematically denied these benefits. Banks refused them loans, universities refused them admission, and real estate agents refused to show them homes in the new suburbs. This wasn't just a failure to help, it was an active widening of the wealth gap. While white veterans built generational wealth through subsidized homes and education, Black veterans were locked out completely. One study found that today, the families of white World War II veterans hold 32 times the wealth of the families of their Black counterparts. This is the foundation upon which our modern economy was built. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice. That historical foundation supports a modern machine that operates on two separate tracks, with different rules, for those with capital and those without. For the wealthy, the system is an engine of exponential growth, powered by what Einstein supposedly called the eighth wonder of the world, compound interest. When you have money to invest, that money earns returns, and those returns then earn their own returns, creating a snowball of wealth that grows at an accelerating rate. This requires initial capital and time, two things that are luxuries for the poor. As wealth begets more wealth, the gap between asset owners and everyone else widens automatically. For those without capital, the system operates in reverse. It's a poverty trap, a self-reinforcing cycle where a lack of resources prevents you from making the very investments needed to escape. But the trap is more than just financial, it's psychological. Researchers have shown that the constant stress of scarcity, of not having enough money for rent, food, or an unexpected car repair, imposes a massive cognitive load. It's like trying to run complex software on a computer with very little RAM. This mental bandwidth tax impairs long-term planning, self-control, and problem-solving. Poverty doesn't just make you poor. It actively degrades your ability to think your way out of it. The system then misinterprets these cognitive effects of scarcity as personal failings, blaming the victim for the predictable consequences of their circumstances. This two-track system is supercharged by the very nature of our money. We operate on a fractional-reserve banking system, which means banks are only required to hold a small fraction of your deposits. They lend out the rest. When a bank makes a loan, it literally creates new money out of thin air, a power that no individual has. This process is the primary driver of inflation, the steady increase in prices over time. Inflation is not a neutral force. It is a hidden, regressive tax that systematically transfers wealth from the bottom to the top. Here's how it works. The new money enters the economy through loans to corporations and wealthy investors, who get to spend it first at current prices. As that money circulates, it bids up the price of everything. By the time it trickles down to wage earners, their paychecks buy less. Their savings, held in cash, lose value every single day. Meanwhile, the assets owned by the wealthy, stocks, real estate, art, soar in value, protecting them from the inflation they helped create. Inflation is a covert wealth transfer from savers and workers to debtors and asset owners. And finally, there's the education system, supposedly the great equalizer. In America, it functions as a great stratifier. Public schools are primarily funded by local property taxes, a design that guarantees massive disparities. Wealthy districts with high property values can raise more money with lower tax rates, funding state-of-the-art schools. Poor districts have the opposite problem, trapping children in under-resourced classrooms from the day they are born. For those who overcome this, higher education presents the next trap: the student debt crisis. A college degree is sold as the only ticket to the middle class, but its cost has been shifted from the public to the individual. This has created over $1.5 trillion in student debt, a burden that delays homeownership, family formation, and retirement. Even worse, student loan debt is one of the only forms of debt that is nearly impossible to discharge in bankruptcy, turning the supposed path to opportunity into a powerful mechanism for lifelong debt entrapment. The rules of this game are not accidental. They are written and fiercely defended by those who benefit most. The tax code is the primary tool for this upward distribution of wealth. In the United States, income from labor is taxed at a much higher rate than income from capital. The profits an investor makes from selling stocks are taxed at a lower rate than the wages a nurse or a teacher earns from working. Because the vast majority of capital gains go to the top 1%, this single policy is a massive, ongoing transfer of wealth to the richest people in the country. The system is fortified by loopholes designed to protect dynastic wealth. The most significant is the stepped-up basis rule. When a wealthy person dies and leaves behind assets like stocks or real estate, all the gains accumulated during their lifetime are permanently erased for tax purposes. Their heirs inherit the assets at their current market value and can sell them the next day without paying a single cent in capital gains tax. This loophole alone costs the government hundreds of billions of dollars and ensures that vast fortunes can be passed down from generation to generation completely tax-free. This legal architecture is maintained by what has been called the wealth defense industry, an army of elite lawyers, accountants, and wealth managers who use shell companies' offshore accounts and opaque trusts to help the ultra-rich pay little to no tax. While this is happening, the government spends hundreds of billions of dollars a year on corporate welfare, providing direct subsidies and tax breaks to large corporations. These programs privatize profits while socializing risk, using taxpayer money to de-risk private ventures. When a company succeeds, its owners keep the profits. When it fails, the public is often left with the bill. This same disparity is visible in our bankruptcy laws. For corporations, bankruptcy is a strategic tool to shed debt and void labor contracts. For individuals, especially since 2005, it has become a punitive system that makes it incredibly difficult to get a fresh start. A system that makes it easy for a corporation to walk away from its obligations, but nearly impossible for a student to discharge their educational debt, is a system with clear priorities. The human cost of this architecture is immense. And it goes far beyond a simple lack of money. It creates a state of debt poverty, where a family might earn an income above the official poverty line but is pushed back into poverty after making their mandatory debt payments for student loans, medical bills, and credit cards. Their labor is not for their own benefit, but for the benefit of their creditors. This is the reality for millions of people trapped in a modern form of debt peonage. The labor market itself has become a site of downward pressure. For the past 40 years, worker productivity has steadily increased, but wages for the average worker have remained almost completely flat. All the gains from that increased efficiency have been captured by executives and owners of capital. This structural failure means that even working full-time is no longer a guaranteed path out of poverty. This trend is accelerated by the rise of the gig economy. Companies classify their workers as independent contractors, a deliberate strategy to evade minimum wage laws, overtime pay, and the responsibility to provide benefits like health insurance or sick leave. It is a business model designed to transfer all economic risk from the corporation to the individual worker. This entire structure is then placed on top of a social safety net that is intentionally kept weak and full of holes. Compared to other developed nations, the United States spends far less on social programs that support the unemployed, the sick, and the poor. The result is that in America, an economic shock like losing a job or getting sick is far more likely to result in a catastrophic fall into poverty. This isn't an accident. It is a policy choice that prioritizes market outcomes over human security, leaving families to fend for themselves in a system designed for them to fail. So why does this system continue? It persists because economic power translates directly into political power, creating a self-perpetuating feedback loop. The wealthy and corporate interests spend billions of dollars on lobbying to ensure the rules continue to be written in their favor. They fund political campaigns, staff regulatory agencies with former industry executives, and promote an ideology that serves their interests. The policy preferences of the wealthiest Americans, who overwhelmingly support cutting taxes on themselves and slashing social programs, are often the opposite of what the general public wants. But in a system flooded with money, their voices are the only ones that are heard. The final piece of the puzzle, the glue that holds the entire architecture together, is the cultural narrative. The system is defended by the powerful and persistent myth of meritocracy and individual responsibility. This ideology is incredibly effective because it takes a systemic outcome, poverty, and recasts it as a personal failure. It tells people who are struggling that it's their own fault, that they didn't work hard enough, that they made bad choices. This diverts anger and scrutiny away from the rules of the game and onto the players themselves. It creates a closed loop where the predictable victims of a rigged system are blamed for their own victimization, ensuring that no one ever questions the system itself. This is the most brilliant part of the design. It is a machine that manufactures failure and then convinces the world that the machine had nothing to do with it. To make this concrete, let's look at two real-world examples that expose the machine at work. First, consider two public school districts side by side. One is in a wealthy suburb with high property values. Because its tax base is large, it can set a relatively low property tax rate and still generate tens of thousands of dollars per student each year. This money funds experienced teachers, small class sizes, new technology, and advanced placement courses. The other district is in a poor community with low property values. To generate even a fraction of the funding, it must set a much higher tax rate, burdening its already struggling residents. It raises only a few $1,000s per student, resulting in overcrowded classrooms, crumbling buildings, and a limited curriculum. The children in these two districts are born just miles apart, but from the age of 5, they are placed on entirely different tracks. One is a path of opportunity, the other a path of disadvantage. This is not about individual merit. It is about an unequal funding formula that reproduces inequality by design. Now, let's go back in time to 1945 and imagine two soldiers returning home from World War II. Both are heroes who risk their lives for their country. One is white, the other is black. The white veteran uses the GI Bill to get a low-interest mortgage and buys a home in a new booming suburb like Levittown. Over the next 30 years, the value of that home explodes. He uses the equity to start a business and send his children to college. He builds generational wealth that he passes on to his kids and grandkids. The black veteran tries to do the exact same thing, but because of redlining, the banks deny his application for a mortgage. Real estate agents refuse to sell to him in the suburbs. He is locked out of the single greatest wealth-building opportunity in American history. He is forced to rent in a disinvested neighborhood, unable to build equity or pass any assets to his children. The lives of these two families diverge completely, not because of effort or intelligence, but because of a single government policy that was designed to include one and exclude the other. The immense wealth gap between their descendants today is the compounded result of that one decision. So that's how the architecture of disadvantage actually works. It is not about bad luck or poor choices, but about a set of interlocking systems, financial, legal, and social, that are designed to perpetuate poverty and concentrate wealth. The trick is to create a system that produces predictable outcomes and then sell a story that blames those outcomes on individual character. This isn't new. Throughout history, societies have built systems to extract wealth and labor using different technologies and different justifications. But the core mechanism remains the same. The system depends on most people not understanding how it works. This is why financial education is a form of resistance. Economic history is a weapon. When you understand the trick, when you can see the machinery behind the curtain, you become much harder to manipulate. The lesson here is not to be paranoid, but to be aware. It is to understand that your personal struggles are often connected to these larger structural forces. It is to shift the focus from blaming the individual to questioning the system. History doesn't just repeat itself, but if you don't understand the patterns, you are doomed to be crushed by them. If this gave you a new perspective on how our world is structured, hit subscribe. History has the answers to our most pressing problems, and I will show you where to look.